eve of our independence, the eve of our 60th anniversary of independence, and that is a significant time for our people. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Remember our normal protocols to keep your microphones muted unless you're speaking. If you have a comment to make, please raise your hand or send it in the chat. But please remember that this evening we have at least 8 presenters. So we're really pressed for time and we're hitting our schedule. That comment is not only made for our participants, but it's also made for our presenters, that you just have 10 minutes to do your presentation. Thank you very much for being with us. And remember, we are having 2 sets of conversations this evening. We will focus on economic sustainability, which is our first conversation with 4 speakers. And then our second conversation will focus on human development for sustainability. Our panelists for discussion 1 are Rebecca Gookool-Bosland, Gavin Hero, Wendy Isaac, and Kevin Ramnarine. Let's begin by introducing Dr. Rebecca Gookool-Bosland, who is an economist, and she's working on improving the development outcomes in the Southwest Peninsula of Trinidad and Tobago. We know her as a former lecturer in the Department of Economics and an associate coordinator of the Trade and Economic Development Unit at the University of the West Indies. The premise of her current work is localized economic development. Welcome, Rebecca. Please unmute your mic and begin your presentation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Deming. And I am going ahead to share my screen. Okay, just confirming that everyone can see. Ms. Deming, are you seeing the screen clearly?
I'm seeing your screen clearly and you're on presenter mode and you're taking up your time, so start.
Awesome, okay, so good evening everyone. Quick contextualization. I am going to start kicking off the presentations this evening by really honing in on where we are at now and reflecting on some of the economic conditions, the economic factors which would have brought us to this point. So this piece of research that I'm going to be presenting this afternoon is a joint edited paper among myself, Dr. Hossain, and Mr. Mark Rupchan, and it is being prepared for an edited book on reflecting on 60 years of independence. So quickly, in terms of how I am going to unpack the 10 minutes that I have, situating Trinidad and Tobago today, we are going to reflect on the economic factors which brought us here. We are going to identify some current challenges and really wrap up with some considerations for future development. So I want to start with this particular graph, and it's a very telling graphic in that it shows or it situates Trinidad and Tobago relative to other economies in the world. In terms of our growth, this maps out how we are performing as part of the global economy, where a higher number really puts us in the front runners in terms of growth, and a lower number really puts us behind. As you can see, we did well over the period 2000 up to the period 2005, but coming down to the end, we are waning, and that is an important place for us to be able to reflect on, because it's not just in understanding where we want to go in the future. It's not just our own internal dynamics, but really how do we perform relative to the rest of the world, and how do we integrate with the global economy. So putting us in a poor performance or relative poor performance, you know, you're going to ask the question, didn't we make some money? Didn't we earn some types of rent, some types of income? And if we did, why is it that we are performing poorly? This graph really shows us how one of our primary income earners, the oil production and oil prices, would have interacted to be able to impact on our economy. This is basically telling us that in general, we did make some money from oil, and coming down to when we actually began to monetize our natural gas via LNG, we also did experience some economic benefits emanating from the hydrocarbon sector. So much so that past 1999, we became known as, or we became known for a natural gas oriented or a natural gas growth initiating economy. In terms of our legacy, and if we want to focus on this particular resource, natural gas, oil, one of the indicators that we want to look at is the barrel of oil equivalent. And this really tells us about the monetary value of our primary productive export sectors. As at 2020, this graph shows us that we would have produced 9.2 billion barrels of oil equivalent. 9.2 over the period 1962 to 2020, 9.2 billion barrels of oil equivalent. So we're going to ask the question, didn't we make some money, or didn't we have the wherewithal in terms of resources to be able to better situate us nationally and globally as well? Our natural resource rents, and natural resource rents really comes down to the monetary value accruing to our natural resources. In the context of Trinidad and Tobago, that would of course be our oil, our natural gas. We are seeing here the solid line that we did earn a significant amount of natural resource rents, but unfortunately associated with earning those natural resource rents, the mitigating interventions were not put in place to protect the income earning, the sustainable income earning generating capacity of our non-oil sectors, the result of which is that these sectors face price uncompetitive, they become price uncompetitive in the global space. So yes, we've been making money from our primary resources, but because of the political economy dynamics associated with a large and expanding natural gas sector in the context of the Dutch disease, what do we have? We have those factors, or we have that tendency to have our non-energy sectors becoming uncompetitive. Notwithstanding, and I do have to show this, that we have had increasing per capita income from a starting position of $554 in the period 1955 to 61 to approximately $17,000 by 2022. However, we are going to ask the question whether or not this increase in per capita income has been equitable. And of course, the indicators some of the indicators really reflect a situation of inequality that is happening nationally and currently. So we're going to ask the question looking at factors or indicators such as our labor force participation and real wages, in particular over the period 2011 to 2020. Both of these indicators were declining. Our labor force participation rate, that indicator tells us that in general, people are not opting to work or not opting to enter into the labor force. And of course, that has many long-term implications for the economy alongside a falling or declining real wage. We do have, and I particularly put in some of my little stick figures there to send a picture. We are in a significant, we are facing a significant governance challenge when it comes to our fiscal balance. So we see basically a negative fiscal balance as a proportion of GDP over the ending period, in particular 1984 to present. This is one of the graphs that I do want us to walk away with, and this is debt per capita calculated over the period 2010 to 2022. This tells us that even without doing anything, the average Trinidad and Tobago person owes the world, the global space, 101,000 TT dollars. The debt per capita, the debt as a nation, the debt of each person in Trinidad and Tobago, as at the end of 2020, is in excess of $100,000. So you're going to ask the question, what did we do between 1962 and 2021? I do have this graphic here that shows that we've had total energy rents generated at 74 billion, total capital expenditure 27 billion, and government expenditure in terms of being total transfers and subsidies as 82 billion. This tells us that inherently there is a spending structural issue in Trinidad and Tobago if it is that we are spending more of our energy rents, the rents earned from our primary resource, going into transfers and subsidies, whatever orientation transfers and subsidies take, whether it is state-owned enterprises, whether it is make-work programs, there is an inherent structural challenge that we need to address in terms of the way that we orient our fiscal performance. In general, we are seeing that as the services sector increases, our GDP growth over time declines, and that is also a challenging situation. We are observing in particular that it is becoming increasingly more difficult to undertake normal operations within our public sector. The perception of corruption in the public sector is growing, and in terms of our ease of doing business, this graph shows us that over time it's becoming relatively more challenging to undertake the aspects of business and just normal public sector, normal activities in terms of progressing our own economic growth and development. I know that Mr. Hero is up next, and I therefore want to just touch for a short few seconds on the fact that we do have a rising crime situation in Trinidad and Tobago, and of course that has put a damper, and of course any reasonable Trinidad and Tobago person would understand that this does put a damper on the rate at which economic activity can be undertaken. Citizen security is a national, global, regional issue that needs to be targeted and deliberately focused on. So in terms of where we are at, even the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago puts our economic reality, summarizes our economic reality in its economic bulletin, acknowledging that our energy sector output is declining, our non-energy sector output is declining. That means the economic value added generated by the productive resources in Trinidad and Tobago are declining. Our output is declining. Our labor market advertisements are declining. That implies that over time we are going to see some rising unemployment. And of course, we are indeed seeing that inflation is rising, and we all know what's going on globally in terms of our unrest in Europe and the impact that is having on global prices for food.
Rebecca, Rebecca,
Yes.
I have to bring you to an end. Can you just wrap up in a minute, please?
No problem. So I'm afraid to look, and this is basically telling us that within the medium term period, things are not necessarily going to improve. So where does this leave us in terms of reorienting our own thinking as policymakers, as persons who are standing at this juncture to support development in Trinidad and Tobago? So I'm just going to summarize by highlighting that there is a resource that has come into the borders of Trinidad and Tobago that we need to begin to plan with. We do need to focus on some governance issues in terms of the way that we are spending. We do need to better integrate into the global marketplace, and we need to get our public sector services right. So thank you very much, Denise. And ladies and gentlemen, I am happy to field questions in the time so allotted in the next few minutes.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. And we need to move very quickly to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Gavin Hero. And before I invite Gavin, I just want to comment on one thing that Rebecca said. Imagine that each citizen owes $100,000. That is significant. So our next presenter is retired military officer and organizational transformation and strategic leadership expert, Commander Gavin Hero. His more than 30 years military and law enforcement experience makes him ideally suited to take us through some of the fiercest current challenges our country faces and to discuss some of our best ways possible. Gavin, I know we've only given you 10 minutes and we've given you a tremendous task, but I know that you're up for it. So please unmute and begin your presentation.
Thank you very much. And thanks again, Rebecca, for a wonderful presentation, for starting the ball rolling in a very, very informative and what I call structured way. Thanks again. Guys, I know we only have 10 minutes, so the speech rate might be accelerated a little bit, but we were thankful for the team behind the scenes putting this together this evening. I would have started with giving you a nice little history of especially what our hostess sort of said, and speaking about the background and the crime and the scenarios, but I said, hold back, I'm not going to do that. Trinidad is and was and still a paradise. So listen to what I'm about to say. I'm about to give you a presentation that is going to include the reality of where we are, where we were, where we are, and where we're going. Where we foot and mama could mean the same thing. Where to pelt, to throw, or to hurl really mean fling. Where a voluptuous woman could cat spraddle, and it have over 100 story about one bull pistol. Where a view from San Fernando Hill could caress the Caroni Plains and kiss the fort in Laventil. And them is the thing that made Trinbago nice. So then why? Why we can't bring it back as a paradise? Sweet Julie Mango, pitch under the tree, but the mamselle beauty or the hum of a bumblebee. Ice cold glass of homemade Moby. A sour market sold beef cook up with pigeon peas and rice. And them is the thing that made Trinbago nice. So then why? Why we can't bring it back as a paradise? Store bay crab and dumpling, Charlottesville fish broth, blue food cookout, oil down, boiled down soft. Where sugarcane arrow still pierce the Caribbean sky, although not as much as before. Look, a jumbie bird just screech at the back door. A standpipe bat with a climpan dipper. Thief 2-3 mango, break beach, and head up the river. Man, them is the thing that used to make this Trinbago nice. So then why? Why we can't bring it back as a paradise? When an elder could have intervened and a shake hand and a hug up used to end a fight. Where we could have sit down and discuss West Indies batting until midnight under a street light. Where it still have some father who does read for the picnic, telling them story about long time TNT. Like a who and doing coming for we. Man, them is the thing that made we Trinbago nice. So then why? Why we can't bring it back as a paradise? Long time, heads bow, eyes shut, first thing in the morning. Now all them children talking about is who bust shut and look, another parent mourning. But not we. We don't have no fear. We here because we care. We understand that we have to pay a price. We understand that we have to make a sacrifice, come together, work together, and bring back Trinbago. as a paradise. That's my opening, guys. We can bring back Tobago as a paradise. That's one of my pieces called Tobago Suite. Now, I know we have to salute militarily 60 years of accomplishments. When we look at crime and security, national security, homeland security, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, we salute them. So I'm going to take the perspective of presenting to you tonight about the salute, looking at the achievements, looking at the mistakes, the challenges, worst case, best case scenarios going forward. SALUTE, the S. We have seen over the years systems being used and introduced, but not being continued. We have not seen proper research and development being applied. So the S is replicable now as we push towards systems. Structure of our police stations, structure of our organizational systems is lacking within national security. There was at one time a good structure for the environment that we faced. Now that the environment has changed, that structure has to change incrementally. Security on the whole, and Rebecca leaned on it a little bit, and service are all part of the S. We, before, always had a trade between the mainland, Venezuelans coming to Trinidad, Trinidad going to Venezuela, people having families on both sides of the banks of the Tocopita, yes. But now we have migration, and what we are seeing is a cross-fertilization of criminality from Latin America, LATAM, and Trinidad and Tobago, and a new type of criminal is coming up in the middle. That is a presentation by itself. So it takes me to the A in the salute, administration. Administratively, you look at the bureaucracy of the system, and sometimes it is pushing back. Every single element of the salute has to drive operations, and administration is pushing back against operations because there are some situations involved in the administration of national security that is affecting everyone, and by and large, it's affecting operations. And I speak and I continue to advocate, we need to now adopt a position of project governance and holding people accountable. In the old days, people were held accountable. A handful of police officers, we started off at 6. It's a 430-year-old police service that we're dealing with, but that has changed. And with administration, we saw a rush program for SRPs, and rushing the SRP recruitment has allowed the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, law enforcement, to be compromised. So project governance, holding people accountable and holding them accountable on timelines with tasks and objectives. And we move along nicely to the L, logistics and legislation. We have seen over the years that legislation has stood up as a muscle to law enforcement. We've seen some good bills. I have them listed here. The Bail Amendment Act, money laundering, financial intelligence, anti-gang, counter-terrorism, counter-trafficking, a new one that came on the scene, and also the latest, the demerit and ticketing system. Very good legislation. We had good muscle. What we are not seeing is enforcement. What we are not seeing is that new aspect of approach for our officers. In the old days coming forward, we had some good achievements regarding the utilization of legislation and the prosecutorial process. Officers were able to stand up in the court of law and win cases. Today, officers are not able to stand up in the court of law and win cases. And we have defense lawyers tying up their feet with a lot of stuff. So we need to see a more robust approach to legislation and the prosecutorial process. And it takes us to the U. What is the U in the salute that is affecting crime and criminality over the years to where we are and to where we're going? The U is us. Look at the person sitting next to you. Look at the person on screen, us. We have a role to play. This is not a Ministry of National Security thing. This is not a Prime Minister thing. This is not a government thing. This is Tobago nice. Bring it back as a paradise. It is us. We have a role. We have a responsibility. We have to escalate our vigilance. We cannot give invites to bandits and to perpetrators. It has changed. We have to harden our target. It was easy long time in the old days coming through. We read about it, and in my research in the paper, you can see that where we could have gone to sleep and left our doors open. Windows were left open. Now we have to close things and chain them. It is us. We have allowed a culture to infiltrate and take charge, and we have to move that back. A culture of criminality, a culture of bling. So we're moving nice along to the T. Technology, training, tradecraft, and tactics. Technology. What we are not seeing is that technology worked at one time because it was relevant to the type of environment that we dealt with, but it's become more sophisticated. Crime and criminality and the scenarios that we're facing has become more sophisticated. We are dealing with a brighter criminal, one who actually has his degree and is sitting behind a computer, but is committing crime because the emergence of TOC has led us down this lane, transnational organized crime. And that is the challenge we're having. And I'm taking you to the E as I close, education and evaluation. There needs to be a greater education of the public and a more educated officer to deal with the situations in the environment that we're treating with. And I introduce and advocate strongly for our leaders and decision makers, evaluate, evaluate, evaluate. That is the pivot for success and the drive to bringing back Tobago nice, bringing it back as a paradise. The 3 M's of evaluation: monitoring, measuring, and managing. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, family of Trinidad and Tobago, I salute our 60 years, systems, administration, us, technology, tactics, and tradecraft, and evaluation and education. Thank you very much for the opportunity to have shared. I stand by for the questions and answers segment. Thanks again, your host. All over to you.
Thank you very much, Commander. And I didn't know that you were also a performer. I didn't know that you were spoken word. I didn't know all of this, but it's absolutely wonderful because I love how you described salute. And hopefully some of us will take that and continue to live with it as a way of advancing our society. So thank you very much. Our next presenter is Wendy Isaac, who is a senior lecturer in the Department of Food Production. Now, we have spoken about economics, then we spoke about security. Now we're talking about food production. She's a senior lecturer in the Department of Food Production, Faculty of Food and Agriculture. Her main research is sustainable crop production systems, non-traditional agricultural technologies, and food security. Now, if we are only able to take a few things away tonight, I'm sure it will make a tremendous difference to our next 60 years. Welcome, Wendy. Please unmute your mic and begin your presentation.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for your introduction. Could I get some sharing privileges, please? I would like to share my presentation.
Yes, you should be try sharing now.
Okay, sure. Okay, I'm hoping that you all could see my presentation.
Yes, we can see your presentation.
Thank you very much. All right, as I said before, thank you very much, Madam Chair, for your introduction. Good evening to everyone, to my fellow presenters. I mean, I have 2 wonderful presenters just before me. I hope I could fit into their shoes, and to the organizers of this esteemed event. I want to start by saying happy anniversary to everyone. Now, first of all, as well, I want to thank you for the opportunity to share highlights of some of the meaningful achievements, mistakes, critical challenges, and the way forward for agriculture and food security post-independence. And some of the information I'll be presenting this afternoon is taken from the chapter that we had prepared for the book, but the title of our chapter is Rethinking Agriculture and Food Security, Trinidad and Tobago's Challenge. This is authored by myself and co-authored by Mr. Omar Maraj and Mr. Michael Joseph. Now I want to start this discussion this evening, in fact, by reading a statement made by a minister in the Ministry of Finance responding to a question in the Senate earlier this year. Trinidad and Tobago in any year spends approximately 125 million US on French fries, not sweet potatoes, not cassava, not breadfruit, all of which make nutritionally and gastronomically superior fries to Irish potatoes. Now, although this may seem like a simple statement, it is to my mind a very profound commentary on the state of agriculture in Trinidad and Tobago. Because what it immediately conjures up or addresses, in fact, is the commonly overlooked factor of any analysis on the state of agriculture in Trinidad and Tobago, and that is the drivers of consumption patterns. Now, we may ask ourselves what drives consumption and what accounts for the preferences, and how that what is essentially a comfort food here, in this case, the French fries, how did that become an almost indispensable part of our local diet? Now, of course, there are other examples. We have apples, we have grapes. At one point in time, that used to be only seasonal around Christmas time, but now they are available year-round, right? So that the desire for the exotic may be a significant driver of consumption patterns. In a recent paper I worked on with a few of my colleagues in the faculty on the colonization of taste, can we return to an indigenous menu? The paper looked at how Caribbean cuisine has been reshaped by European imperialism out of imports of people, fauna, and flora introduced to reinvent the region as a primary technology of the Western capitalist enterprise. Our dietary cultures were therefore not shaped by the nurture and consumption of food indigenous to our region, but instead foodstuff accessible within established trade networks, as well as ethnic preferences based on ancestral traditions, were the primary determinants of what was considered food. Now, I go back to slavery. We'll recall that, salted cod was provided from the metropole as a chief protein content for the enslaved workers, alongside crops that came with the migrants, such as wheat and rice for the masters, yams and dasheen for the others. But independence did not inspire, and this is an unfortunate event, independence did not inspire a thirst of localization, either in patterns of industrial development and gastronomical practices. So much so that it gave way to an American cultural hegemony with the stupendous proliferation of KFCs, all those fast food outlets, Pizza Boys and McDonald's. So that the case of Trinidad and Tobago perhaps best illustrates what I will say is a catastrophic occurrence, because we had our concentration now on the petroleum-based prosperity, right, and foreign exchange, so that we have witnessed over the last half a century of independence and near complete disappearance of local fruits. It's only now we are seeing them, some of them coming back, and the marginalization of agriculture to a near vanishing point as a contributor of GDP. And you recall that our GDP is very low. It is 0.5. That is the contribution of agriculture. Now, needless to say, we have had a number of different achievements over the years. And the government, for example, recently, they have targeted the agriculture sector for economic diversification with planned investments and agriculture promotion programs. There have also been a number of initiatives to increase sector participation. And for example, we have grants for youth and we have grants for existing farmers in excess of 100,000. We also had recently, through the Ministry of Trade, we had they embarked on making grants available for agro-processing in excess of 200,000. And of course, there are a number of different agro incentives, agricultural incentive programs. One of the notable achievements that we have had since 1991, there was this statutory board, NAMDEFCO. NAMDEFCO is a statutory body responsible for facilitating the growth and the sustainability of Trinidad and Tobago's agricultural sector. We have also had a number of other initiatives. We had the Maruga Agro Park, although we have a lot of concerns as to its placement. It is an agro-processing plant. Now, during the COVID pandemic, there was a 23-member post-COVID-19 roadmap to recovery team that was initiated to deal with the painful economic and social impacts. More recently, next achievement that we had was the Youth Agriculture Homestead program. A program gained to giving young people between the ages of 18 to 35 training and technical support, and most importantly, land. Now, it's unfortunate that, we have graduates coming out of the University of the West Indies and they don't have, this initiative was not at least available to them, not only our graduates, but UTT graduates as well in agriculture. And more recently, a signed MOU between us and Guyana. And again, a recent occurrence in the Agri-Investment Forum and Expo, something that I myself benefited from because I was one of the exhibitors. Did mention before that I'm also an active farmer, and my husband is also a farmer, and we do a number of agricultural activities, and we contribute to the development and food security. Now, what is also notable, you will notice from this graph that over the years, the allocation, the budgetary allocation to agriculture was in decline for some time. Right, fortunately for us, over the past 2 years, it increased from between 2021 to 2022, it increased by $51 million. And it is now, this year, it was $1.249 billion, right? That is a significant increase. Now, what are some of the significant mistakes that we could point out over the past few decades since post-independence? Most notably is the dependence on the energy sector. If there's one thing that we could lament about is, we have because of the dependency on the energy sector, the agricultural sector has been in decline. It has been neglected for several decades. Now, Hussein and Tiwari, in their technical paper on Dutch disease in the wake of a second oil boom in Trinidad and Tobago, noted that although natural resource booms play an important role in helping to alleviate some of the traditional obstacles to development, including bridging fiscal deficits, savings and investment gaps, and providing a rapid inflow of foreign exchange, it also brought adverse effects. Now, in their recent publication, Ramdwa, Ganpat, and Solomon in 2020, explained that one such of these adverse effects may be the consequential shift away from agricultural employment to state-funded welfare programs, or what we know better as make work programs such as CPEP, right? Now, we have a number of critical challenges we face in agriculture. Most notably, of course, is the high import bill. Our import bill is in excess of 6 billion TT, right? But in addition to that, the state of food and agricultural security in Trinidad can be characterized by a number of things. Limited land resources. You have limited arable land in Trinidad. Most
Wendy,
of our
Wendy, you just have one more minute to wrap up. Yes.
All right, okay. Let me just quickly go through. So we have low investments in research as well as climate variability. We have a number of other issues challenges that we have to deal with. Predial larceny is of utmost importance, especially over the past 2 years, 2 or 3 years during COVID. All right, it has intensified on pest and disease problems, right? We have a significant impact on agriculture. Right, but what is the way forward for us? We have a number of different avenues for the way forward for agriculture, and this includes improved technology in water management, promotion of protected agriculture, climate smart farming, precision agriculture, digitization in agriculture, improvement of land management. But essentially, what I want to emphasize in our way forward, we must build resilient agro-food systems. Now, improved research towards data-driven decision-making, exploring innovative ideas such as, sargassum and the use of sargassum insect farming, something that a new area of research that we are now about to embark upon at the university. And we have a number of other things as well. Quite recently, we also embarked on a seed bank initiative because, you know, one of the major things that we face as a nation is that we're so dependent on importation, not only of food, but we are seed insecure. Most of our farmers, they have been using imported hybrid type seeds, and they are no longer saving seeds, right? And this is very serious for us as a nation, because without seed security, you have no food security, right? And also research into looking at some of our indigenous crops they know that have that are adapted to our environmental conditions. Also reduce reliance on agrochemicals using biopesticides, cover crops, and mulches. All these things will add and contribute to building more resilient agro ecosystems and food systems for us here in the Caribbean. Right, and my last point was strategic placement of semi-processing plants in growing areas. And this brings me to the end of my presentation, and I look forward to the questions that will follow in the question and answer segment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Wendy. And I note that you're a lecturer, woman, and farmer. And that to me is very, very impressive. Thank you very much. We move to our next speaker, our final speaker in this segment. And after this final speaker, who will be given his 10 minutes, don't worry, you will get your 10 minutes. Then we will entertain questions or comments from the other persons on our chat tonight. You know, when we wake up tomorrow morning, our country will be celebrating 60 years of independence and the continuation of our journey as an independent nation. When I asked this next speaker how he wishes to be introduced, would you believe all he said to me is, he's a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago who was born after we gained independence in 1962. So welcome, Kevin. Please unmute your mic and make your presentation. Kevin Ramnurain.
Hi, good afternoon, good evening. Are you all hearing me?
Yes, we are.
All right, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to put on my camera, but if the Wi-Fi is affected by the camera, I'll switch the camera off because I'm getting problems with the Wi-Fi. So again, it's a pleasure to be here. I only have 10 minutes to discuss the most important economic sector in the history of Trinidad and Tobago. So I'll start off with a gentleman by the name of Dr. Vernon Mulchansing, who most of you all may not have heard of. I certainly have never met him. He was a senior lecturer in economic geography at UWI Mona, and he did his PhD thesis on the history of the oil and gas industry of Trinidad and Tobago, and that would have been published in the 1970s. And he used a Latin phrase, a Latin term to describe the oil and gas industry of Trinidad and Tobago. It's called sine qua non, which is that without which. And what he was saying is that the oil and gas industry is that without which there would be really no modern economy of Trinidad and Tobago. So my starting point is actually September 1962. We are 1 month into our status as an independent nation, and a well is drilled off the East Coast. And the name of the well is OPR-1, and OPR stands for Offshore Point Radix. And the well is a dry hole, and the result of the dry hole causes 2 of the 3 companies involved in the well to exit Trinidad and Tobago, leaving one company by the name of Pan American Oil, which is called Pan American Trinidad Oil Company. And they returned to exploration in 1967. And they drill a series of wells that are either dry holes or wells that have discovered natural gas, but they're not looking for natural gas. And as they're about to give up, they drill a well called OPR-2, Offshore Point Radix 2, that discovers oil and natural gas. And they drill a few more OPR wells, and they discover what is the teak field. Some of the wells that they drilled, which were natural gas wells, went on to discover the cassia field and the mahogany field. Subsequently, they discovered the Saman field and the Poi field. And I give this reference because I'm doing a deep dive research into this exploration program. At this point in time, I'm collaborating with a PhD student, and we have gotten the Ministry of Energy to give us access to the well files from the 1960s. And I think that exploration program of this company called Pan American Oil, and they went on to change their name in 1969 to Amoco. That exploration program is quite possibly the single most important event in the economic history of independent Trinidad and Tobago, because it laid the foundation for not one, but two economic booms. The first one is pretty obvious. Teak, salmon, and poi were the basis for the first oil boom that ran from 1973 to 1982 and caused the production of Trinidad and Tobago to rise to an annual average of 229,000 barrels of oil per day in 1978, which is our peak oil production. And then oil production went into decline. Oil prices also went into decline. The boom ended in the early 1980s. And from 1983 to 1989, we had a 7-year period of economic contraction that has only recently been eclipsed by the period 2015 to 2021. Most recent data released by the CSO today indicates that we've now had 7 consecutive years of economic contraction, 2015 to 2021. And I know I'm speaking in the presence of people here who live in this data. So that exploration program by Pan American, which became Amoco, as I said, also discovered the mahogany and the cassia fields, for which there was really not much use for that natural gas when it was discovered in the late 1960s, early 1970s. The teak, salmon, and poi was also producing associated gas. And that associated gas from teak, salmon, and poi was the basis for the first phase of Point Lisas, which was the Tringen 1, the Fertrin, and the Escort plant in the period 1977 to 1981. And then cassia was the basis for the expansion of Point Lisas in the 1980s and 1990s. And then finally, mahogany's gas is what fueled Train 1. So I think in this short period of time that I have, I wanted to really focus on how important that exploration program was in the late 1960s. So Dr. Tiwari asked me to focus a bit on what are the achievements of the energy sector in the last 60 years. And the main achievements would be our monetization of natural gas. Rebecca pointed out that since independence, we've produced 9.2 billion barrels of oil equivalent. And that actually represents 90% of all the oil and natural gas produced in Trinidad and Tobago since 1908. So we have produced the majority of hydrocarbons in our independent, post-independence period. So in terms of success, monetization of natural gas through Point Lisas and then ultimately through Atlantic LNG would clearly stand out as a success. The other success, which I think is not often touted and sometimes taken for granted, I think Trinidad and Tobago is now a net exporter of talent. I think there are more Trinidadians by far working as expatriates outside of this country in the oil and gas industry than there are expatriates working in Trinidad and Tobago, a situation which was, inconceivable 25 years ago. That has a lot to do with UE and with UTT and our investment in training our human resources. So that to me is another achievement of this country. In terms of some of the mistakes we've made mistakes. We've had too much political interference in the state enterprise sector, and that led to the ultimate demise of Petrotrin. We had very famously or infamously a Trintoma drilling program in the late 1980s, where the state attempted to to get involved in the production of natural gas offshore. And that Trintomar program ended up in failure. And that sort of spooked the governments of Trinidad and Tobago coming afterwards. So we left the production of natural gas to the BPs and the Shells of the world. And the state confined itself mainly to the midstream and the NGC and so on. In terms of, and this is what I'm about to say will obviously cause some sort of controversy, I suppose. I think the closure of the refinery in 2018 was the wrong thing to do. And that is something which I could demonstrate factually and analytically. In terms of our current challenges, our gas production is now at a 19-year low. We are producing significantly less gas than we did 10 years ago. And that, of course, has manifestations such as the closure of Train 1. We have 2 methanol plants which have closed. We have 1 ammonia plant which is closed. And the iron and steel plant is closed. So the manifestation is, plant closure and the related job loss and so on. In terms of other challenges that we have a declining competitiveness in the energy sector in Trinidad and Tobago. And that is because the cost of producing a unit of natural gas, the cost of producing a unit of oil have generally been on the increase. At the same time, too, we are competing. And this is, I'll come to one of the challenges of Trinidad and Tobago over the years is that we tend to believe, today I spoke to a man I consider to be one of the brightest Trinidadians in the oil and gas industry. And he's actually around my age. We used to work together. And I asked him the question about, what are some of the things that he thinks that we got wrong. And he said that there's this notion that we exist as a bubble and that decisions are made in Trinidad and Tobago for Trinidad and Tobago. And that is not the case. We are competing for capital globally. So when BP and Shell and EOG and the multinationals, the BHPs that operate here, make investment decisions, those investment decisions are made relative to other countries in which they operate. So we are competing for capital. And the more we become uncompetitive, is the less likely that capital is to flow to Trinidad and Tobago because these companies have options. In terms of what does the future portend for Trinidad and Tobago? I want to talk a bit about the energy transition, which is inevitable and which is
Kevin, you have expired your 10 minutes, but please wrap up.
I just wrap up, okay? So I just wrap up by saying that Trinidad and Tobago has a future in energy, and Trinidad and Tobago has a future in green energy, and that all the elements to create a green energy value chain exist in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And can we invite, we're going through our question and answer period now. It's going to be a short one because we have our second round of presentations to be made. So can we invite Vivekan Mahadeo to ask his question? It was in the chat.
Hi, good afternoon to the panel, and I'll quickly ask the question. In terms of agriculture, a lot of investment in the last couple of years seem to increase the gear towards agriculture, but the GDP is at 0.5%. We were at a high in the 70s and maybe 80s at 6% GDP agriculture. With all these efforts, why hasn't agriculture, the GDP, we have seen an increase in GDP?
Who wants to take that question?
Hi, Denise. I can go ahead to start, and then I can probably hand over to Wendy. So in terms of productive capacity in the economy, in the agricultural sector, one of the things that we have seen is a perpetuation of some of the deep-rooted challenges of tenure, of labor migrating outward, of having a situation where our food imports have so increased that it has resulted in some, how should I put it, some challenges in terms of managing scale and cost for our domestic agricultural sector in an environment where the average consumer has tended their taste pattern towards a relatively cheaper commodity, one that is more easily accessible in terms of quality, in terms of being readily available within the supermarket or even within the market. In some cases, it has combined, and some of these factors have combined to result in our domestic agricultural sector not taking off the way it should. So that, in a nutshell, in the context of not having a clear, comprehensive plan to elevate the role of agriculture in food security, is one of the reasons why we haven't had that sector growing the way it should. Perhaps Wendy can also comment on this question.
No, I'm in total agreement with you, Ms. Rebecca. That is absolutely some of those same points I was going to make. Because of our high import bill, our high importation, I mean, we import not only food commodities, but all our agricultural inputs. They're extremely high, right? And more so now, they're increasing because of, you know, the supply chain shortages and all those things, so those are some of the major reasons for why I believe also, in agreement with Rebecca, that the GDP has remained stagnant at 0.5%.
Wendy, there's a follow-up question. It's not follow-up, another question for you. So how do we correct the de-agriculturalization of the agricultural sector? Wendy?
It's a tough question.
It's a tough question.
It's a tough question because it will call for it'll call for a number of different players coming into the fore, and a conversation between all the different stakeholders and how best we could approach and a strategic approach to agriculture and planning for food security, right? So
okay,
it's
okay. Thank you very much, Wendy. Can I move on to Kevin? Kevin Maglu, you have a question? Kevin, if you snooze, you lose, huh?
Hi. Okay, what happened is the Wi-Fi was given. Just because of time, everyone there made some very good points there, and clearly former Minister Ram Narayan there understands the energy sector inside out. So points to him for that as usual. But this particular question, Ms. Isaac might be more poised for this because her presentation was very well done with respect to agriculture and food security. No one previously they were speaking about food security and so on here, Trinidad and Tobago, and that is becoming that in itself is a pandemic as far as I'm concerned, perhaps even worse than COVID. I mean, it's a little bit early, but time will tell. That after everything you presented and said tonight, that recently concluded Agri-Forum. Do you believe that, was it really about food security, or was it just a gallery themselves and ploy and gimmick to, the taxpayers as usual? Or do you think it's too late for that that particular forum where food security is concerned?
Thank you very much, Wendy. You have another question that sticks you.
Yes, all right. Yeah. Well, as I mentioned before, I was part of I was one of the exhibitors as well. And I mean, it was fortunate for me in that I was able to network with a number of other stakeholders, to expand my business, right? So it was good for my part. And I understand it's good, but yes, it has come really too late It is something that should have been done years ago. You know, that dialogue between different various stakeholders, between leaders in the region, right? The JAGDEO initiative, for example, that is what really, that was in the 80s or 90s, I believe, right? And that is what really heralded, and we never really paid attention to that clarion call so long ago, right? But it's a bit too late, but it's never too late. We must never say it's too late for anything. So it should have some positives in it, and we are hoping to see within the next few months, next few years, at least that 25% reduction in the food import bill as a result of the efforts of this agri-investment forum.
Thank you very much, Wendy. And the final question I will ask before we transition to our next segment, I put this question to Commander Hero. Commander Hero, what single action can be taken to minimize the trauma that we're all feeling because of crime?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Denise. What we are seeing is that lack of effort for national coordination. In that if we can work together as the various arms of national security, coordinated, maximizing the resources in a way that is well planned and theatered, we can treat with some of the issues that are facing us as high risk and threat, and hence the reason some of the communities are facing the situations that they're facing today. And that takes a collective effort. That takes a concept of operations in law enforcement and military is called CONOPS. And the concept of operations that is advised that we should look at is something called C4SDI, which is command, control, communication, and coordination. That's the 4 C's. C, for security and defense from an intelligence-led perspective. And that is where the whole systems integration, and you've been hearing me speaking about a national grid that factors into our CCTV system, factors into our response system, and provides a 24/7 monitoring for situational awareness so that we can work smarter. So the coordination from a national aspect works towards a national grid so we can cover and zone our areas and move in so as to treat with responses, situational awareness, and a 24/7 monitoring. So national coordination is the best approach to start treating with some of the issues of crime that we are facing today.
Thank you very much, Commander Hero. And all of us on this chat now, thank you very much for being here. We're going to move on to our second round of discussions. And while we're doing that, can I ask you to put your key takeaways in the chat? So we have some things that we can look at after this event is over. So we move from economics sustainability to human development for sustainability. And we have 4 presenters again. They are Jade, Govaya, Anjani Sharma, Jerome, Delisle, and Judith Copeland. We begin this discussion focusing on the very important area of water and the environment. Our first presenter is Jade Govaya. She's a water and environmental specialist who designs policy solutions for some of the institutional challenges we face. And I know some of you must be saying, my goodness, anybody could come and tell us anything good about water. But her work has supported various Caribbean governments on implementing I love this statement, non-regret investments to future-proof of the water and sanitation sector. I mean, when you talk about non-regret investment, I'm amazed. I don't know what you're talking about, but I'm excited. Jade, could you please unmute your microphone and begin your presentation?
Thank you very much, Ms. Dummings, and I hope everyone can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Great. So this evening, what I'm going to get into is just some reflections on how far we've come for the last 60 years in the water and sanitation space and where we need to go and what we need to do to get there. And I just want to acknowledge my co-author, Dr. Narayan from the Department of Food Production, and our advisory team, who are people, professionals that have spent their lives in the water and sanitation space. And when we talk about water and sanitation, we are talking here about a supply chain. It's not just water supply. We are talking about the water environment that provides water resources. We'll start there. And then, of course, that water is harnessed and then sent to be used in different economic sectors. And then we also collect that wastewater and we treat that wastewater. So I thought it was important to start with the institutional setup of the water sector. And it starts with, of course, the main actor, and that's WASA. And within WASA sits a resource regulator for water, and that's the Water Resources Agency. And of course, we have the policymaker, the Ministry of Public Utilities, and within there, we also have the Meteorological Services Division, who has an important monitoring role when we're talking about weather and climate. There are also the regulators, the RIC and the EMA, and then of course, Drainage Division. And really, this is meant to show the complexity in how these relationships and the dynamics in the institutional setup of the water sector. And then we, of course, move on to the legislation, the instruments that give effect to this institution. And you'll see here that the two major acts that govern how we manage water are very much outdated. One of them came before we were independent, and the other one just right after. The regulatory instruments have come in a little bit later on with the most recent update to the Environmental Management Act through the water pollution rules in 2019. But how does all of this affect service? And I'll start with, again, the top of that supply chain, and that's water availability. And when we talk about water availability in Trinidad and Tobago, we have that figure that you see there, 2,700 cubic meters per person per day. According to international standards, that's a good amount of water. So it means that we really aren't water scarce. And how we've been able to manifest that is about 98% of our population have access to water, both direct as well as through standpipe access. And then 30% of our population are also sewered. And then the majority of us have on-lot systems, whether it's septic tanks or soakaways. And we still have, a considerable percentage, 7%, that use pit latrines. So what are the things that we really have achieved in the last 60 years? And from our perspective, the first one is really regulation. So we've been able to set up an economic regulator for the water sector, which is the RIC. And we've also been able to set up an environmental regulator to help us protect the water environment. And then, of course, WASA has a regulatory function. And a lot of countries are still struggling with regulation, but we have managed to set up these institutions and have legislation that governs how we regulate the sector. We've also done an incredible job at producing water. So in 1960, we were producing only 50 million gallons of water per day. And we have quadrupled that to 240 million gallons per day. So we've put the infrastructure in place to be able to harness that water that we do have. On the wastewater side, in recognizing that wastewater management protects our environmental and public health, we have managed to sewer and treat and collect a lot of the waste in our urban areas. So the Port of Spain area and environs serviced by the Beetham wastewater treatment plant, similar to San Fernando, Malabar in the east, and then Tobago. And you'll see here that I don't have pictures of the facilities themselves. I have pictures of the actual impact of these facilities on the environment to show that this is a significant achievement for us, and we are doing pretty good when it comes to wastewater treatment. And then the final point is, I think we have done a really good job at pulling together ourselves and communing to form community advocacy, community groups, lobby groups. And I think that, we have 4 listed here, and these 4 entities have a very solid track record in really lobbying for environmental change and that environmental change has impacted how we secure our water resources. And there are many others that we can put up on the slide. So what are some of our pain points? And I'll start again with the top of that water supply chain. And these are maps of our watersheds, and the red area points to where the Water Resources Agency has designated as very poor or degraded watersheds. And you'll see as we move across the decade that we have managed to really make some negative impact on our watersheds. And one of the things that you don't see here, which is one of our pain points, is Tobago is not here. So we have a huge issue with data and missing data and collecting the data that we need to be able to analyze and make the decisions that we need in the water sector. Of course, the institutional setup is very complex, and there are many entities with duplicating roles, and they don't necessarily work together to really bring the cohesion that's required in the water sector. And one of the key points is that our regulator of water resources sits within the entity that uses, the primary entity that uses and abstracts water. So that entity itself is not regulated when it comes to our water resources. Again, because of our very high production, when we compare ourselves to our Caribbean neighbors, Jamaica and Barbados, we have double the amount of production per person. And that is also manifested in the amount of water that we do use. And you'll see here from international standards, Trinidad and Tobago doubles that. It doubles the World Health Organization's recommendations for what is reasonable consumption. And the paradox here really is that despite this very high production and high consumption, our population still is not getting a continuous water supply. And the reason for that comes in the next graph. And that's, are we getting what we pay for? And you'll see here that Trinidad and Tobago has the lowest tariff in the region. And it starts really with the World Bank has very nicely classified why this is the case. And it starts with very limited regulation. So in Trinidad and Tobago, we do not have service standards for water and wastewater service provision. And we have this very long hiatus between our review of that tariff. So what happens is that consumers use water inefficiently. There's not a proper price signal. The assets begin to deteriorate. There's a lack of investment, and the service begins to deteriorate. And because of that, of course, customers are unwilling to pay. The state then has to step in. That brings a lack of accountability, and efficiency keeps dropping. And we're in this crisis of huge rehabilitation costs. So there are two steps that we really need to take to move forward. And the first one is, how do we stabilize the water sector? So how do we reach equilibrium? And it starts with reconfiguring the water sector ecosystem. And the ecosystem doesn't just refer to the physical environment, it refers to the institutional environment in which water is managed. And the first thing is that we need to establish legislation and an institution to manage the country's water resources. And that involves monitoring and assessing and analyzing how much water we have available and where's that water needed across economic sectors. And then we also need an entity to coordinate all the work that's required to really bring a difference in the water sector. And then part of that reconfiguration also must involve a space for academics and NGOs and community groups to influence how decisions are made in the sector. Not forgetting one of the more important features, and that's strategic infrastructure and system upgrades. So we have to, yes, we're doing well on wastewater, but we have to continue expanding that coverage. And we have to optimize on all the water that we have. Every household, every building should have a rainwater harvesting system. And we need to look at reefs. And I guess one of the pain points that many utilities face, and that's reducing non-revenue water. So when we begin to talk about no regret investment is tapping into the water that you produce and you don't get revenue for. And that loss comes in many forms. It comes in the physical side where water is lost through leaks, but also on the customer side. Most of us, don't pay for water based on what we use. We pay based on something that has absolutely nothing to do with consumption, and that's the property value. And then finally, we have to look at restructuring how we finance the sector and the link between that financing and performance in the sector. And that starts with the rates for water, ensuring that it's based on efficient, and I underline efficient, recovery of operating costs. And it's based on consumption, accountability. And tied to accountability is ensuring that the system that we have for levying charges on water-related duties, for example, water pollution fees, needs to go back into protecting our environment. And that should also be tied to data transparency. We need to have a real-time system where our public is aware of what is happening and the parameters in the water sector. And then that moves on to my final point of how do we get to the next 60, and that is future-proofing the water sector. And in my view, the top 3 risks that the water sector will face is, one, that environmental supply chain risks. So our watersheds will continue to deteriorate and our environment will not be able to protect the quality and quantity of water and also buffer us against extreme events. And that ties into the climate crisis. The water sector is going to be the most affected sector when we're talking about climate change. So how is our infrastructure going to be able to maintain service through that climate change? And then technology, of course, is changing the business model of the water sector throughout. And this can have a positive impact for us in Trinidad if we are able to leverage that. So it starts with master planning. And master planning, when engineers talk about master planning, we're not talking 5-10 years, we're talking 20, 30-year horizons that builds resilience in the sector and also leveraging technology to bring what we desperately need, and that's efficiency. And then finally, perhaps one of the more impactful, even though softer measure, is applying behavioral economics to the water sector, ensuring that people are equipped with the skills that they need to be able to value water. Because water is cross-cutting, it cuts across space and time, and water planning is national planning. So really, there was a time where we knew where water came from. We knew where there was a village spring or a well or a water course or river, and we protected that. And that really is where we need to go back to, not walking for miles to get water, but this connection between where water comes from and protecting that water. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Sarah Jade. I mean, there's something that you have me still shocked by. You said that we've quadrupled our production of water since the 60s. I just find that absolutely amazing because most of us have a tank, so something else is happening, but thank you ever so much. We now move on to our next presenter, who is a medical doctor, Dr. Anjani Sharma. She was trained in the United States and returned to work in Trinidad and Tobago in NCD management and health communication. She's worked with the Ministry of Health and has been involved in projects involved with health promotion in schools. And that to me is really an excellent place to start if we want to change behavior starting in our schools. Anjani, can you please unmute and make your presentation? Remember, you have 10 minutes. I'll kind of flex a little bit, but I don't want to have to stop you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Unfortunately, my presentation has come up as a rolling slide. I don't know if people can see that. So good evening and thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to participate in this forum, where we're able to take a multifaceted view of how our nation has progressed over the past 60 years. In this brief presentation, I would like to mention a few key areas relating to this progress, which include achievements, shortcomings, current challenges, including things necessary for progress and those to avoid. So, sorry, I'm trying to share my... Hello, can you still hear me?
We can hear you. Yes, we can hear you.
Is it that I'm not sure the presentation wasn't showing?
It started showing, but now it's gone. So could you try again?
Bear with me 1 second. I know that I'm under 10 minutes, so sorry about that. Right, where are we? So I'll carry on in any case. So basically we have let me try this one more time. Okay, so basically I've summarize some of our meaningful achievements in health and healthcare in the past 60 years post-independence in Trinidad and Tobago. It's not an extensive list of achievements, but some key areas. Trinidad and Tobago has health facilities which provides primary and secondary care free of charge at the point of access. We have our own under and postgraduate training programs in areas of medicine, nursing, dentistry, pharmacy, and optometry. We have patient access to key medications available via the CDAP or Chronic Disease Assistance Program, and more specialized drugs are available in the public system via the hospital formularies. Importantly, key factors such as infant and maternal mortality rates have significantly reduced since from 1960 to 2020. With regards to infant mortality, we've gone from 56 per thousand live births to 14 in 1960 to 14.8 per thousand live births in 2020. The global estimation is around 29 per thousand live births. This has been due to implementation of programs that address vaccine preventable diseases, improved access to healthcare, health education, socioeconomic and environmental factors. For example, access to education, food, housing, and of course water, which we've heard about this evening. In terms of maternal mortality, the data available, which is quite limited, does show a reduction from 81 per 100,000 live births in 2000 to 67 per 100,000 in 2017. And this has helped Trinidad and Tobago achieve the Sustainable Development Goal of reducing the maternal mortality rate to less than 70 per 100,000 by 2030. However, these are not just standalone things. Within the systems provided in healthcare, there must be continuous progression in order to maintain and further improve these outcomes. Other areas include mental and sexual health services have improved in terms of access to services, availability of services, and community education. So I don't know if you can see the next slide about shortcomings in the health sector within the past 60 years. So one factor which limits the growth and progress of our healthcare system is the lack of retention and initiatives for medical and nursing practitioners. Staff are often overworked in areas that are understaffed and underserviced. This obviously affects work ethic, morale, and burnout is likely a common issue, although we don't have extensive data regarding that. So we have well-trained professionals, but the private sector and also moving abroad to practice are enticing career moves to healthcare professionals, which leaves us further short-staffed and further frustrated within the healthcare sector. The other shortcomings over the last couple of decades really is electronic record keeping. This would allow better continuity of care, access to medical records by all healthcare professionals involved in patient care, and also for patients themselves. It would also allow better auditing of medical treatments and care so that we can focus more on needs-based management of patients and population health. Obviously, electronic record keeping is also better for accountability, but it has been really challenging to implement locally. Further shortcomings include non-communicable disease management. So we have things like ischemic heart disease, heart attacks, diabetes, hypertension. These are 60-year-old problems. They account for the main causes of morbidity or illness and mortality in Trinidad and Tobago. And despite greater awareness of risk factors and options for management, they still remain a major challenge due to requiring a multi-pronged, sustained and sustainable approach, but they only receive interest in certain areas, which creates silos of action with gaps in between. Mental health also, as much as we've had some progress in that area, it remains highly stigmatized and not seen as a key area of holistic care. There is much more medical management of mental health rather than availability of counseling and psychotherapy programs, which can help people as they move through their medical management and become more, is better able to manage their illness. Well-being and preventative health should go hand in hand and ties in with my previous 2 points. These are not purely medicalized issues, but they're rooted in other areas of life. For example, employment, recreation, education, and the environment. Improving health literacy and helping people to understand how their behaviors impact on health has shown to be highly effective in other countries, but we are still lacking in programs that are wide-reaching and help to bring communities together to understand the impacts of those aspects on health and well-being. Inconsistency in priority setting and management has also been a shortcoming in the health sector in the last 60 years. And it's mainly in relation to political will. It has been a common issue that important projects started under one government can then be adjusted or reduced in priority or abandoned under another. And unfortunately, that inconsistency means that priorities are shifted and changed rather than policies set, which then follow through. In terms of the most formidable current challenges within the health sector in Trinidad, there are a few issues here. Challenges such as our two-tiered medical care that is provided. So although we have free primary health care available to all, which is great in principle, unfortunately, we do have a two-tiered system of public and private medical care in Trinidad and Tobago. Healthcare is not exempt from market forces. Prolonged waiting times for people to access treatments, poor communication, lack of equipment and services in the public sector has led to the exponential growth of a parallel private sector. In 2017, there were 11 hospitals, over 100 nursing homes, a multitude of GPs, and over 300 pharmacies, labs, and diagnostic centers in the private sector. This does not include unregistered facilities, including traditional, herbal, and alternative services, which all address a demand and provide layers of variable care, but especially if left unregulated in a system where people are prepared to pay out of pocket, these can lead to clinical harm, delayed or protracted treatments, courses of management, and have a lack of accountability related to them. So in terms of imperatives for a best case scenario within the health sector, the things that would help in a systematic and sustainable way to improve health, well-being, and healthcare services in Trinidad and Tobago includes healthcare planning, which is based on needs, improve communication between service providers, whether, start looking at things like implementing electronic records and sharing systems. So bringing the technology into what we are able to use in terms of our communication. Providing consistency of care by established standards. So the medical care that you would receive wherever you are in this country, whether it's Togo or Port of Spain, remains consistent. Of course, there's always, it's not just a protocol-based system of establishing, but also the idea that practitioners will use their clinical judgment, but again, coming back to things like being able to audit treatments and look at what things work well and where we need improvements, that's quite important. In terms of continuity of care, making sure that we do have good communication and between service providers, but also services that will target all aspects of the life course, because infant health is different to child health, which is different to teenage health, which I've mentioned in a previous slide. There's a huge gap in adolescent services. So our young people who are entering into a period of time in their life where they are learning to make their own decisions and form habits are not being serviced adequately by the current healthcare system. And we do need to address that. Going forward as well, we want to make sure that NCD, non-communicable disease prevention and management are also addressed in a more systematic way. Prevention is so much better than cure. We all know this, but putting that into practice has been a challenge. The cost of managing someone when they have a heart attack and need intensive care or being in a hospital setting is huge. Being able to identify their risk factors, help them to understand that and make changes whereby they will minimize, reduce, or even completely rule out that risk would be far better and far more sustainable going forward. And of course, imperatives for best case scenario within the health sector also including health in all policies, because healthcare is not just about the health. There's a multifactorial side to healthcare. So things
Dr. Sharma,
yes.
Sharma, can you please wrap up?
Yes, of course. So things that hinder progress includes lack of consistency in identifying priority areas, subsequent lack of planning and funding, including the retention of the providers needed to run a smooth integrated service for their nation. And over the next 60 years, a systematic, sustainable, needs-based approach to health and well-being will build on the progress already made and support a happy, healthy nation. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sharma. And my takeaway from that is the importance of electronic record keeping, which is an issue that we have as a society, where electronic record keeping just is not done. And hopefully the digitization will happen, so we will not have to be talking about this in the future. Thank you very much. Our next presenter is Dr. Jerome Delisle, a professor of education leadership at the School of Education, UWI, and his main area of research is education. Can we have his presentation?
Hi, Ms. Deming. I will go ahead to share. Dr. Delisle, just let me know when we can flip the slides.
Please continue with the presentation. It's a video. Rebecca?
Hi, everyone.
Ms. Deming, I'm just verifying that you all are hearing.
We just heard, hi, everyone.
Okay.
We're hearing. Rebecca, maybe we should just hold on that and move to our final presenter, and then we can come back to that if we get it to work.
No problem, Ms. Deming.
So,
Okay, now I can always look at it after.
So what would you like to do, Dr.
Well,
Delisle?
let's go through the slides.
Okay, then. Okay.
Yes, I'll go very quickly.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
I mean, sure. Okay, so I'm talking a little bit about achievements and challenges and opportunities in our 60-year-old system. Not much time, but there are some unusual features. Next slide. I want to start by talking a little bit about some assertions concerning change. The first assertion, which is very important to understand, is that politicians do not change education systems. In fact, it is the people who do, and we've learned that since 2000 in the Germany system as they respond to PISA data. The second thing is that structure, culture, and agency are important. Structure means the structure of education system. Culture means our beliefs and expectations. Agency means our ability to change, our ability to be empowered. And the third point is that really we need more discussion. So this is a great opportunity to begin that discussion. Next slide. 3 more assertions. Education change is very slow. It doesn't take place rapidly. You can't come into 5 years and think you're going to make grand changes, because most changes take 3 to 5 years. Groups in society will struggle for the advantage. That's natural. And 6, very unusual, we had very little structural change in Trinidad. Next slide. Let's talk a little bit about agents. Right. Let's talk about some more lessons from PISA again, so that we could understand. When they changed, they responded to data. The media was intimately involved. That's not what you're going to see in our society. The media doesn't really take a central role. They have specialist education reporters. Citizens were involved intensely, not just the politicians, because politicians, rightfully, they would say, well, they were high, but very, very important for individuals. And finally, they tinkered with the system, they tried out things, and they collected data. So some lessons first for the future. Let's move on. There is a country that's doing a lot of changes in the Latin American, the Caribbean, and that's Chile. Now some people say, well, education hasn't changed. You can see they changed their voucher system so that they made sure that low-income students were not losing. And you can see how that 2008, this is data from the IDB, just all the schools came together. You saw improvement. Let's move on. So let's look at some pictures. This is, public exams gave trouble everywhere, including England. The students were out in masses in England and Scotland. But next slide, in Trinidad and Tobago, not so much. Not all of us. So the level of agency, the level of belief in terms of how much we can change, perhaps it's not there yet. Next slide. And this is an interesting slide. I like this because I don't hear this argument at all in our country. Justice for state schools. How can I value a system that doesn't value me? So that in terms of our own feelings and beliefs, that's something that we have to develop. Maybe it has not developed in 60 years, but there is some really, really strong sense of fairness and community orientation. We saw that in our second Kodak interviews, even with members of the denominational board. So we are moving there. Next slide. Okay, so let me tell you about some of the achievements. We produced some outstanding individuals. We have a good mix of schools. And of course, we think we can't get the data for sure, but we think we're probably doing best in terms of the quality, 5 O levels and English and maths. That's a hard standard for Caribbean countries. And of course, in terms of PISA data, we are behind Uruguay and Chile. We wouldn't meet Chile soon because Chile just continuing to move. Next slide. This is our data that, of course, you may or may not see in the Second Kodak report. I think we pulled out the fact that we have about 45% getting what we call a full certificate. People criticize us on that. They say, well, everybody don't have to get a full certificate. Well, it's 3 levels to sell in KFC, and it's 3 levels also to get to the National Energy Skills Center. The same. So let people come complete their secondaries. Don't judge people. Next slide. We go a little faster. And of course, this is the PISA thing. We see that we compete well with most of the the South Asian countries except Turkey, but we are not world class. And we can't blame the common entrance or SEA. We can't blame the mixed system because we actually put Belgium and Netherlands there, which both have early selection and denominational schools. So we got to move, right? Next slide. Just going very quickly. Challenges, the structure of the system. Why is there so much variance between the schools, even larger than Germany, whose system was designed like that? That is something to really look at. Next slide. Oh, right. I just want to mention, by the way, that well, that point is so complex, let's skip it. So Dr. Ann Hicklin Hudson, she talked about why it is that Caribbean people have continued to implement the stratified system inherited from the British, French, and Dutch colonizers. She's a Jamaican. She teaches in Australia. And that's a very important point. We've been trying to think about that, and we think that there's a lack of agency, there's acceptance of the structure, and the structure is actually built into the the culture. So the sort of morphostasis is the system changes and then changes back because it wants to stay right here. Next slide. Disappointments. Well, no one makes mistakes in education reform. When our next opportunity arises, we have to take it out. We're not going to blame anybody, blame politicians, blame parties. Whenever we get the next opportunity, we got to jump on it. Next slide. There are no mistakes in reform, really. If you look at reform, some people do reform as one event, and that's because of the way Caribbean people do reform. But reform is really a series of events. So 1, 2, 3 is what we had to do in the second quarter. We had to identify the problem. We had to fully analyze the problem. Sometimes you don't have data in the Caribbean, and finally you have to now extract good theory, good policy, look at different countries to see how to solve it. But even then, even if we write all that rubbish, which might be thrown away, the ministry has to implement it, and then they have to think of it as they look and see, and they have to monitor and evaluate. And those are really hard things for Caribbean systems, which need to build. We need that collective capacity so that there are no mistakes in reform. We're not going to blame anybody. Just in the future, next 60 years, we're going to move forward. And finally, I think, no, not finally. In our historical research, we were surprised that in the 1975 Prime Minister's proposals to Cabinet, and we look at a cabinet note from 1976, when Eric Williams realized that he wasn't going to get the changes, he recognized that what he wanted, people say, well, oh, yeah, he's a politician, but he understood that we were better together. If we could get the denominational schools in the system, it would be better. If we could get the communities, it would be better. Unfortunately, he was disappointed. Well, there are a lot of disappointments to come, but just be aware that he was reflexive enough because he was knowledgeable to understand that we are better together. And finally, so part of it is generating. Lovely that we have these conversations. Generate talk, generate ideas so people can become reflexive and move to action. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you ever so much. There's so many takeaways that I have from this presentation, but one that I have kind of nuanced in a different way is that you take 3 O-levels to get into sell at KFC. I think it's the same 3 O-levels to get into the police service, to get into the public service. So I don't know what we're saying there, but thank you ever so much for bringing that to our attention. Our next presenter is Judith Copeland. Professor Judith Copeland holds a PhD in the field of marine biology. She lectures in marine biology and coastal ecosystems management at the St. Augustine campus at the University of the West Indies. Her tremendous environmental and ecological experience can make a difference to our marine and coastal development as we navigate the next 60 years of independence. Professor Judith Copeland, can you please unmute and make your presentation? You have 10 minutes.
Thank you. And I'm really hoping that people haven't fallen asleep. Thank you, everyone, for staying on. And thanks for the opportunity to speak. I'm representing our team, my colleagues, Dr. Ladena Kanhai and Mr. Hamish Asmath. We jointly put this chapter together on the environment. As a nation, we can indeed be very proud of some key achievements in the environmental field, even if it did take us some time. Top of my list would be conservation of sea turtles, in particular, the leatherback turtle. It is, I think, perhaps the greatest success story for Trinidad and Tobago. The story started around 1964 with one of Trinidad and Tobago's the oldest club, the Field Naturalist Club, that's now 131 years, I believe, this year. At the time, the turtle sort of research was led by the late Professor Peter Bacon, who was a senior lecturer in my department here at the university. Along with club members, villagers, and the forestry division, they worked feverishly to protect the leatherbacks. The community itself was encouraged to protect turtles and engage in what was very new at that time, this ecotourism activities, creating of guest houses and so on to highlight the very leatherback turtles that they were trying to protect. In other words, there was a resource where they could generate income from. It was really a very good success story. In 2006, all the turtle community groups joined forces to create the Turtle Village Trust, which is an umbrella organization that still is holding today. In 2014, quite some time, much later than 1964, the Environmental Management Agency finally designated the 5 species of sea turtles, which included the leatherback turtle as an environmentally sensitive species. In 2017, the leatherback turtle population and the community at Grand River, with a local conservator, Mr. Len Peters, they were highlighted in renowned naturalist Sir David Attenborough's documentary, Blue Planet 2. So a lot to be thankful for. In terms of environmental legislation, environmental management legislation, that is, there's been much advances, and I'm very pleased to say that it started specifically in 1995, when the EM Act, or the Environmental Management Act, was passed. And we now have about 40 pieces of legislation addressing various aspects of environmental management. Now, of course, this would have built on the older legislation like the Petroleum Act and oil pollution and so on. At the same time, and we now have about, of course, 28 or more government agencies, that tends to change, involved in carrying out environmental and associated functions. And of course, they're ably assisted by the efforts of numerous NGOs, and a large number of private companies have actually begun to contribute. We must be proud of our Main Ridge Forest Reserve, and hopefully you've seen it recently in 2020, and this is a very prized designation. In 2020, the Main Ridge Forest Reserve, which was actually set aside since 1776. It represents the oldest forest reserve in the Western Hemisphere, and it is a popular site for bird watching and ecotourism. And it now has the prize designation of being on the World Network, or listed on the World Network of Biosphere Reserves. And this is done under UNESCO's Man and Biosphere, MAB program. Yes, we have succeeded in various activities: conservation, protection, rehabilitation of our wildlife and their habitats. We have done a good job of protecting and conserving our biodiversity. We have a large number of protected areas, including Ramsar sites, Nariva Swamp, Caroni Swamp, Booker Reef, all of these with the relevant management guidelines to protect our rich and valuable resources. We continue to boast of 2 jewels in our crown: the Eastern Wright Nature Center, that was founded in 1967, a world-renowned bird-watching site, center, leader in ecotourism, and was featured multiple times in the Audubon Society's magazines. It was one of the first nature centers to be established in the Caribbean, and of course, the Wildfowl Trust, that was founded in 1966 and is the 2nd oldest wetland conservation trust in the world. And finally, as a nation, and I'm afraid that obviously there are lots more that I can't really mention in 10 minutes, but as a nation, I'm pleased to say that we have become more educated, more aware of our environment through environmental education and awareness, through NGOs, through clubs, universities, the EMA, the Institute of Marine Affairs as well. And of course, we've moved formally to teaching environmental management, environmental science in schools. In fact, and I'm not going to say what year, I belong, when I was at the University of the West Indies as an undergrad, I was in the first environmental science class, and there was all 8 of us present at that time. After having had these successes, that are some of them pretty old, we have indeed made some grave mistakes. And we are reaping these benefits. I think given the recent deluge, the rainy season, flooding has become very, very regular, almost every day during this season, especially. I think we are hearing more persons saying, my area has never flooded before. I've never seen anything like this. And of course, it means that this is really something that we could have avoided. That continues that we have unmanaged development, and the Water Resources chapter talks about that. Illegal reclamation of land, illegal quarrying continues, deforestation, the clearing of hillside, the northern range impacts. All of these impact on our everyday lives. We are sitting, waiting in long hours of traffic. There is flood everywhere, and we are seeing the devastation and the havoc that it wreaks. Development is in Trinidad and Tobago is going at a pace, unfortunately, often without adherence to laws and caring for protected areas and areas to be conserved, even as we have specific legislation, for example, the hillside development legislation. Much of it is not adhered to. As was mentioned by Mr. Hero, I think it was in his presentation, there appears to be an obvious lack of implementation and enforcement, even though we have noise pollution rules, water pollution rules, environmental police. We do not appear to be winning the battle. We have very formidable challenges. Often decision makers are making decisions without consulting the real experts and without weighing all of the consequences. And two very quick examples of this. Do you recall in 2012 at the very Leatherback Turtle hatchling communities that I talked about earlier at Grand River, we were highlighted in a very negative light on the BBC News in 2012. There had been an erosion event, as happens all the time in coastal areas, and a decision, uninformed decision in my opinion, was made to bring a bulldozers in to move the sand. As a result of this, of course, thousands of turtle hatchlings died and numerous eggs were destroyed. Consultation with experts was missing. We also saw the Greenville Floods in October 2018. Residents of Greenville experienced flooding, the likes of which the country had never seen before. Many have left, never returning to those homes, and it continues. Pollution continues, plastic pollution. We have not moved away from using one-time plastics. After 22 years, decision makers have failed to pass the beverage container bill, which was intended to provide a structure for the collection and the safe disposal of beverage containers. Will we ever move away from this bottled water culture, which is indeed a mega industry with severe negative impacts? And of course, it has not helped having the underperformance of our water suppliers. And I know our earlier speaker also talked about that. Water pollution, agricultural chemicals, sewage, we also heard from our previous speaker. We still, in 2022, have people living in communities on unsewered systems. Mr. Hero mentioned accountability. Polluters should pay. And I feel strongly that also people who make decisions must be brought to account. At the same time, we need to remind ourselves and to remind our decision makers what the true value of these natural resources are. And I know with the economists on board, we recognize it only very recently in the literature as economic valuation of our resources. Two quick examples. Research showed that coral reefs in Tobago provide shoreline protection. That's the natural function by virtue of them being there. They actually reduce erosion and wave damage at a value between 18 and 33 million US dollars per year. In other words, if they weren't there, then we would have to be paying money to build structures to prevent that erosion. Yet, our coral reef is declining in health due to our own actions. Deforestation, we heard, major threat to climate and the quantity and quality of available fresh water. If we remove forest cover, as we continue to do, there is a direct link to drinking water treatment costs. The more forests, natural forests, that stays in the watershed, then the lower the cost to treat that water, and there won't be the need for bottled water perhaps. Yet 6% of our forests were lost between 1969 to 2000. We heard from our medical colleague, prevention is better than cure. This is indeed the cheaper option if we manage our resources. So how then can we make this message clearer to our decision makers? There needs to be serious considerations. How do we balance development with these economic decisions and not at the expense of the environment? My wish, perhaps, is, if I'm asked, is that we should call for a moratorium on all new hillside and coastal developments. Let us take a step back and ponder, as it were. Moving forward for the next 60 years, and this is now about our children, and I know Kevin Ramnarine also, he's a child of the independence, I guess, and it is now about our children and our children's children, their futures. These natural resources that we're talking about, it's a component of natural capital. These assets provide us with free goods and services, which we know as ecosystem services. It is all of this that underpins our economy and society and makes life possible for all of us. So how do we do it quickly? Use our knowledge and tools. No need to reinvent the wheel. One colleague mentioned it already. We have invested a lot in our nationals at the university, at the UTT, UWI, at UTT, technocrats in ministries, NGOs. We need to move towards an integrated, coordinated process that seeks to balance development and conservation goals and objectives. And I'm going to stop there, Denise, before you stop me.
Before I stop you, thank you ever so much, Professor Cobin. And we're about to wrap up this session. So I'm going to invite all the speakers to just give us one takeaway, beginning with Professor Cobin. Can you give us something in 30 seconds? What's your single takeaway from this evening?
Sure. I was going to say that as we hold this, the red, white, and black very high, I also want to encourage us, and it's just common in the literature now, the blue, what was I going to say? The blue, the green, and the brown. And that's we're talking blue economy, we're talking the green economy, that was mentioned as well. And there's the brown agenda. Together, that's really where we want to be. And as I mentioned, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. It's been done before, it's been done in other areas. Let's just join hands and work towards saving this wonderful island of ours. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much. Delisle, Jerome Delisle, Dr. Delisle?
Yeah, well, my takeaway is two things: agency and opportunity. We need greater agency, and we need to take the opportunities that come to us to change the education system, which is critical for us developing as a nation.
Anjani Sharma, what is your takeaway?
I think that Commander Hero had a great idea with the salute, and I think that can be applied to all aspects of development for Trinidad and Tobago going forward. And thank you so much for giving the opportunity to join in today.
Yes. Sarah Jade?
My takeaway would be focused on the future. And I think children and education are the future, and we must teach them how to value water. Thank you.
Well, Kevin is not with us, so we move on to Wendy Isaac.
Yeah, my key message, thank you very much. My key message this evening is moving forward as a 60-year-old nation is that we strive towards making a conscious effort in having our plates with at least 50% locally produced food.
Thank you very much. Commander Hero.
Yes, thanks again and for a wonderful session. A great job as a host. And my takeaway this evening is that I believe together, as a collective, we can move in a direction for the betterment, for the development, and for the rescue of Trinidad and Tobago. We've seen a panel and a platform of subject matter experts here this evening that just shows what a small group of us can do and present. So let's hope that the ears will tune in and people are listening. Great job.
Thank you very much. And Rebecca?
Thank you, Denise. To everyone, it was an absolute pleasure to rub virtual shoulders with all of the experts. I want to encourage everyone going forward. What is important is monitoring and evaluation and remaining smart with our goals, with the way that we track, with even holding our various institutions accountable. So with that, good night, and Denise, I hand over to you.
Thank you very much. And I'm just going to say good night, happy independence. And thank you to everyone who's been on this program tonight. We look forward to continuing these programs. And some people ask if they will get the presentations. No, you will not get the presentations, but it is going to be on YouTube. So you can go and view it at your leisure. Good night, and we look forward to seeing you again. Happy independence.
Same to you. Bye-bye.